Two B C three
One,
four.
one, two, one, 1 2 3 2 1, 1 2 3 4 3 2 1.
Stop! Scaring me.
Say your name and spell it.
Well, I can say my name pretty easily. The spelling may be a challenge. It's Robert Joseph Giuliana. Actually, it's Giulian O, but that's a whole other story. And it's RobertGiuliana or O, depending on how far back you go in my family's history.
We're good.
We're good.
We got two microphones going. We get lights. We get camera.
Lacking one,
Get-
only one thing:
Yes.
talent.
No. Females. That's not everyone. Anyway, so tell me about the day you did not kill Frank Zappa.
Yeah, the day I didn't kill Frank Zappa. True story. Um, Back in the day, in the '60s, when I lived in Greenwich Village, Frank Zappa lived around the corner. I was on West 10th, and we weren't friends or anything. If you had said to him, Bob Giuliana, he'd have said, "Who?" Anyway, one day I'm sitting in my sharp white Porsche, ready to cross 7th Avenue, and waiting for the lights to change. And Mr. Zappa pulls up beside me on his motorcycle, no helmet, of course, hair flowing, being Frank Zappa. And he looks at me. He looks at the Porsche, actually. And the macho in me made me push the pedal down a little bit, roared it, and then he roared his motorcycle. And the light changes, and he takes off like a bat, but he doesn't go straight ahead. He doesn't turn to the right, which would be away from me. He turns left, right in front of me, who I'm accelerating like hell, just to flex my Porsche. And he was right in front of the car, and I stomped on the brakes and slid. And he didn't even look. He heard the screeching and didn't even look, but he was having fun. But that's, had I not had the brakes but not been the quality they were, he and I would have been on the front page of the New York Times that day. But as it was, I didn't kill him, and I never had a chance again. So that's that story.
So tell me about Sardi's Bar. And first, give us a little setup for Sardi's for those plebiscites that don't really know much.
Sardi's Bars was at least, maybe still is, the theatrical restaurant and bar right off Broadway. It's on 43rd, and it happened to be right next to the Ames Theater where we taped Merv Griffin, and our offices were upstairs in the same building with Sardi's, so it was the place to go after. Well, with any excuse. Anyway, one day I walk in, and during the middle of the day, and there's this famous bar with all the metal plates that say who the actors were, who's favored those spots, and authors and so forth. This bar is torn away from the wall, and it's into the dining room, and there's plastic hanging. And Vincent Sardi happened to be there, and I stopped and said, "Vincent, what's going on?" He said, "Well, we're putting a new bar, and we're putting a bar upstairs, and this is going to be changed, blah, blah, blah." And I said, "That bar?" He said, "I know, it's a shame. It's got an incredible theatrical history." I said, "What are you going to do with it?" He said, I'm going to cut it up, I guess." I said, "You can't do that." He said, "Well, what am I going to do with it?" I said, "Sell it to me." Well, I didn't know. He said, "Oh, well, can you get it out of here today?" And I said, "Well, yes." And I said, "What do you want for it?" He says, "Give me $1." Well, I never gave him the dollar, but he said, "Okay, get it out of here." Well, so at that moment, I owned Sardi's Bar. And I like to tell people a story. Let me tell you about the day I owned. No, let me tell you about my owning Sardi's Bar. And then I went back up to our office, and the vice president had just bought a wonderful building up in New York State to build an inn, and told him about this. I said, "Would you like to buy it?" And he said, "Oh my God, that would fit perfectly in our inn." I said, "You got $1?" He said yes, and he never paid me either. So, but he had it out of there that day, and they put it up country in in their B&B and somewhere in New York State. So that was, that was the day I owned Sardi's Bar.
Have you ever thought about visiting the bar, or seeing, or get online and see if that bar's still there?
Well, as luck would have it, the inn burned down, including Sardi's Bar. Unfortunately, I heard about that a few years later. So I didn't probe to why it burned down or anything, but that was too bad. It had all these wonderful plates of names, theater people. That's just on these various seats. But no, it went up in smoke somehow.
So,
Sad.
so tell me about Paradigm Films.
Paradigm Film. After 3.5 years of working on the Griffin Show as camera one, and after turning down Merv's offer to become the producer of Jeopardy, after a while I left the company. I was leased to Merv Griffin Productions by Teletape Productions. So I convinced Teletape Productions that they needed a film division. They said, fine. I went over there and started a film division. And very soon after that, we got our first film job, and it was shooting the field portions of Jason Robards Jr. doing the lead in Spoon River Anthology. It was supposed to be shot in the studio, but with cutaways to the outside. So that was my first job. I hired a union cameraman, went out in the field, and it was a total bust. It was awful. I mean, I just couldn't get any chemistry between me and the cameraman, and it kind of, and Mr. Robards could feel the lack of energy, and it was just awful. And we shot all day out in Connecticut, and the footage ended up, as they say, on the cutting room floor. It never made it into the film, which was a good thing because it was awful. Anyway, I came back very embarrassed to the home office, and I'm sure that Teletape Productions had the sinking feeling that they had hired a loser. Anyway, I was convinced that they had. But anyway, shortly thereafter, we got another job, and I found two young guys, Mike Wadley, John Binder. They owned Paradigm Films. And we shot one day. I came back to the company, and I said, buy that company, buy Paradigm Films. These two guys were unbelievable. Mike, cameraman, John Binder, audio writer, whatever. And they were electric. The personalities and the skills were unbelievable. What they could do to an environment just with their personalities, and then the skills of. Anyway, a couple of months later, Teletape Productions bought Paradigm Films and set us up in a space up on. They bought a building up on Broadway, 82nd Street. Anyway, it was just that, and then we lasted as a company for a couple of years and did incredible things. I mean, we were hot. We worked for Bobby Kennedy. We worked during Richard Nixon. I know I didn't want to. They didn't want to go to the Nixon shoot, but I did because I wanted to meet Mr. Nixon, and I spent 2 days with him up in New Hampshire with the crew, his gang, most of whom ended up in prison. But anyway, that was Paradigm Films, and I left them. That's a whole other story. But shortly after I left them, we were actually in the early stages of shooting Woodstock, getting ready to shoot the famous Woodstock. 68, was that 69 what it was? Anyway, I left them and went to Mexico, did films down there. And they went on, and there were 6 Academy Award nominations. Mike was nominated for director, and unfortunately, it was given to Bob Maurice as producer, who had never made a film before, and they had put him in my seat as producer, and he didn't do much of anything, but he ended up getting the Academy Award, and a lot of money and a lot of fame. I've never heard of him doing anything since. Anyway, that was Paradigm Films. Amazing experience for me, and that's Paradigm Films. There's other things that happened, but that's basically the story about Paradigm.
Do you must have a lot of regret from not sticking around for Woodstock?
Oh, it's definitely a downtime for me. You know, we had worked for a couple of years to sign up some famous types for cinema verite feature films. Uh, Barbara Streisand had agreed to do one with us, and John Wayne had agreed to do one with us, and I think Ray Charles may have been the other one. And these were verite was when we went and lived with them for 3 months or 6 months, or whatever, and they after a while we turned into the wallpaper, and then we got some real stuff and cut it together. Anyway, but Mike and John heard about this strange folk thing that was going to happen upstate, and I was caught unawares and not happy with that. After spending all the time we did getting ready for the others, and I zigged when I should have zagged, I guess. I mean, yeah, it's just kind of mixed feelings, but basically, it was unfortunate that we didn't work out something. I wish I had gone and brought a board earlier into their thinking so that I could have adapted to it, but it landed on me like a ton of bricks, and I wasn't happy with that. Anyway, that's the sad part of New York.
So what was it like working with Joan Crawford?
Oh, that was Joan Crawford. Yeah, that was just a one-day shoot when she was president of Pepsi Cola. She was she had some charities that she sponsored, and we were doing one, and it was on a weekend in the studio where we shot the Merv Griffin show, and I got to see Mummy Dearest. I must say. She wasn't on camera. She was behind me. I was the camera, and I had to roll in on the principal. And in those days, we didn't do strictly zooming. We actually moved the camera once in a while. And the floor was pretty good, but there was a slight wrinkle in it, and it was the slightest bob in the shot going in. I don't think anyone other than me and her saw this. And the director didn't say a word, so it was certainly acceptable. It wasn't a big deal. But every time she was behind me, behind my left shoulder, looking at the talent and looking at my screen. And every time we went over that tiny wrinkle, she'd go, just loud enough so that I could hear it. Oh, yeah, she was a piece of work.
So what about, tell me about the Bobby Kennedy story in terms of just, I don't know if you talked about that on camera before.
Oh, yeah, Bobby Kennedy. That's another sad. You're bringing up sad stories today, right? Yeah, Bobby Kennedy was one of the many politicians who hired Teletape Productions, which was at that time, the leading company that rented out facilities and rented out remote cameras, camera crews. And Bobby Kennedy was running for the nomination for president at that time, and he came into the home office periodically, and the studio, they actually built a remote bus for him with camera facilities, the whole thing. It was a big deal. And one of the parts that they brought us, brought Paradigm Films on, was going out to California with him to run out there. And I put together a crew. I didn't go, but Pat Sandley, who's this wonderful person, I wish I could reconnect with her. She was my associate producer on several things, and she went out there running that crew, film crew, and she went out there, and she and the rest of the crew were right beside him when he was murdered, when he was shot. And a couple of days later, she came back, and she said, "Bob, I'm finished." I said, "You're leaving the company?" And she said, "No, I'm leaving film. I can't take this anymore. It's just too much." And I said, "What are you going to do?" And she said, "I'm going to be a famous chef." Now, she was a pretty good cook, but I said, "You're going to be a famous chef?" She said, "Oh, yes." She quit. Within a few months, she was sous chef at the Waldorf Astoria. And within, I think, a year, she had been hired by some international company out of London that was opening some classy restaurants in the U.S. I don't remember the name, but she managed the back of the house. Big deal. And then she became the spokesperson for the Avocado Board of California or something. She achieved her goals. She's a wonderful person. I wish I could, as I said, I wish I could reconnect with her. But that was part of the story, the New York story.
Tell me about being given a piece of cake by Eleanor Roosevelt.
Well, as a whiplash, that takes me back many years earlier when I was still in Boston. I was working, I was a cameraman for WGBH TV, public television. It used to be called educational television back then. I was a cameraman for a while, then I became producer director, but this is while I was cameraman. Eleanor Roosevelt did a 13-part series, one a week or two a week, at Brandeis. GBH was the producing company, the technical company, and I was the cameraman. I got to meet John Kennedy. He was Jack then, Senator, Adlai Stevenson, and some other really heavy hitter Democrats. She got anybody she wanted. She was an extraordinarily powerful woman, and not nearly appreciated, I don't think, enough who she was and what she did. But anyway, one of these sessions at Brandeis, somebody, whatever, they presented her with a cake, candles flaming. It was her 75th birthday. And the Boston Globe, I'm pretty sure it was the Globe, was there. And they took pictures, and they had her feeding me a piece of her cake. And I'm standing in front of my GBH camera, television camera, looking rosy-cheeked and young. And she's feeding it to me. Well, it made the Boston Globe. It was in the papers that night, and I'm still trying to find a copy of that photograph. I never saved any of that stuff. I mean, it's accidental that I have any interesting cameras, any shots of anything. But anyway, that was me working in her presence. She was 75. She was fading. She was once in a while she'd fall asleep on set, and of course we'd stay off of her when she nodded out. And she was I won't tell anybody, but she was 10 years younger than I am right now, and I may nod off at any moment.
Who was one of your favorite people to meet, and did they surprise you as to how they were and who they were? Other than somebody maybe you've already mentioned, is there anybody that you've met that you felt like that was kind of interesting?
So who would I say was among the people I have met?
That you found really remarkable and
who I found remarkable, interesting? That's tough. Reggie Groff, perhaps. He's a cameraman, director of photography I've met up in Maine and done a little work. A fascinating guy. Very generous. Good soul. Good cameraman. Good DP. Other than Reggie, it's hard to...
hard-pressed.
I could name drop forever, and I've been known to do that. But I think you've achieved something. I mean, name dropping is one thing. When they start dropping your name, then you've really scored. But I've worked with Streisand and Dylan and, with Emperor Haile Selassie and whoever. And if you mention my name to any of them, they'd say, Bob who? I was just ships in the night. I had the mostly pleasure of working with some pretty interesting people. I don't know what that proves, but I don't know. It's a tough one to answer. I hadn't thought about who among the most interesting. They're all, I mean, famous people, big achievers, are all interesting because they've achieved so much. And I scratch my head when I meet them and say, why are they in the position that they're in? Why are they rich and or famous or notorious? I mean, Phil Spector, the Wall of Sound, the producer, music producer. He's in prison right now for murdering a woman. He sent me a case of champagne. He was on the Griffin show, and he and Merv were debating politics. And Phil Spector was rather liberal, and Merv, wonderful guy that he was very conservative politically. And they went back and forth. And after the show, I was chatting with. Was it after the show? No, it was before the show. I was chatting with Spector backstage and it came to politics, and I told him where I was coming from. And on the show, he's debating with Merv because something had happened politically. And he said, "Yeah, and your cameraman there, that one, he's on my side. He's a liberal." Of course, I swallowed my tongue. But I saw him after the show, and he said, "Yeah, whatever, don't worry about it." And he sent me a case of champagne for my pain, I guess.
Tell me about being on Merv Griffin's boat. You were on Merv Griffin's boat, and just the strangeness of it.
Oh, Merv Griffin didn't have a boat, actually. Merv Griffin was I can't say it enough, was a wonderful, sincere guy. You'd never guess that he was as powerful as he was. Really, I felt very strong. A fan of his. I saw him, for 3.5 years in a lot of circumstances, and he always came up as an honest, kind guy, and generous. But no, as far as he worked 6 days a week, and he worked from no limit to his hours. I mean, he was up before anybody else, and I was told, and he worked right through the day and into the night. And he put together an empire. I mean, he became very extraordinarily wealthy, helicopter and all the rest of it. But still, a regular kind of guy, always. And he was a very sober, sincere dude, except for 2 days a year. He would throw a winter party, usually in one of the hotels, and a summer party on maybe one of those boats that goes around Manhattan. And it was Katie bar at the door, open bar, lobsters, shrimp, steaks, roast, whatever you wanted. It was all there for his Griffin Productions, which included quite a few people by then. And he would, he'd be the host, and he would drink until he fell down, literally. And they would take him out of there by the armpits, and that would be it for 6 months until the next season. And he would throw the huge party and get drunk and fall down, and that would be it. Yeah, Merv, wonderful guy. Did I ever tell you the story about how he got started and got rich? Probably not. He told me he had been discovered.
Start off, just say Merv Griffin.
Say what?
Just start off by saying Merv Griffin.
Yeah, Merv Griffin. What do I know about Merv? What was my experience with him? Wonderful guy. We were chatting once, and he said, I forget what brought it up, but he said that he had been discovered 3 times. He was a singer, slightly off-key typically, but he was a singer. He'd been in a couple of movies, and he was an Andy Hardy kind of bright-faced guy. And he said, they'd discover me, and they said they had this new star, and then they'd forget about me for a couple of years, and then someone else would discover me. And he said I was married, and I think he had a son at that by then. But anyway, he said, it was looking kind of scary financially. And so Giuliana, his wife, he said, Giuliana and I decided that what we were going to do was we were going to start a game show because the profits are extraordinary. There's no cost in producing the show, and the ads sell for as much as if you spent a lot of money producing the show. He said, so we decided we were going to do a game show. We decided we were going to be the producers because that's where the money is. We weren't going to turn it over to some production company. So that was our game plan. Now we needed a show, an idea. And he was just typical Merv generosity. He said, Giuliana and I were driving around, And she's talking about it. And she said, well, how about if we come up with a show where we give the answer and the contestant has to come up with a question? And he said, bingo, that's a heck of an idea. Gave her full credit for the concept. They got together, they pasted up an idea, a plan for actually starting the show, and they needed money. And he said, we didn't have any money. We had a few $1,000s. That was it. And we didn't want to owe anybody anything because it would be very expensive in the long run. So he said, I got on a plane. I flew to Vegas. I put all the money I had on one number or color. I forget what he said. And he said, big odds I hit. He said, that financed Griffin Productions. And I said, wow. And he said, I'm not the only one. He said, Federal Express, the owner of that company, could not make payroll early on in the company's history. He did the same thing, went to Vegas, put the money down, he hit, and came back and was able to start, continue with the development of Federal Express. Had he missed, there would be no Federal Express, at least not owned by him. Anyway, that's a story about Merv and his, I guess, yeah, that's something, a bit about Merv. There's a lot more, but that's kind of an interesting thing. And he eventually offered me the job producing Jeopardy, which was very generous because that was his show. He loved it, and I've turned it down for various and sundry reasons, but a lot of respect for the man.
Let's pause.
Okay, let me tell you about Paul. Oh, I don't have it rehearsed, but it'll vomit forward.
So, Bob, tell me about whether you've been in any dangerous situations at all.
Dangerous situations other than marriage, that kind of, yeah. As fortune would have it, I've done some travel and been in some strange, exotic places and lawless places, I guess is a fair statement. Obviously never intended to be in harm's way. Some of it was explicitly really dangerous, and some of it was just tangentially dangerous. I've been waiting for an opportunity to use the word tangentially for a long time, and glad to get it off my chest. Kind of dangerous. I was in a pen with a beautiful young lion named Coco. This was in Ethiopia, and I have some very nice slides of that episode. And we were shooting around our trip to Ethiopia and doing a film for the Emperor Haile Selassie. And he had a thing for animals, wild animals, and he had this pen, and there was a beautiful young lion, just a wonderful critter. And we were told not to worry, he was perfectly safe, although he did have a chain around his neck, which was probably 20 feet long, and the links were like that and thick. So, but the chain wasn't attached to anything, but he walked around in there dragging this chain. And, I petted him, and Franco filmed it, and then I had some still shots of Franco on the ground with the camera, shooting the animal, filming the animal. And Franco and I said, we don't like the look in the eye of that lion. And the gatekeeper said, please don't worry. The animal's totally tame. We shot him, put some footage in the film, I believe. A couple of months later, Franco calls me up and said, Bob, I just saw a newspaper article. We were back in Boston, I think. He said, you remember Coco? I said, I'll never forget Coco. You remember his keeper? I said, oh yeah, interesting guy. He said, well, Coco ate his trainer. He killed his trainer, the one who told us not to worry. So I guess we were in danger, and that look in the lion's eye was like looking at a menu when he looked at us. But anyway, that was potentially dangerous, although we were kind of nervous, but we weren't scared out of our wits, so we would have been on the other side of the fence. But that stuff happens. But Ethiopia, there was a really dangerous situation. We were traveling, the guide interpreter, one guy, he was Germa, and then there was the driver, and then there was Franco, who was the cameraman, producer, and Harding Roberts, who was the second camera, and me. I guess I was whatever. We were driving from Addis Ababa north to Eritrea, and Ethiopia were at war and had been for a long time because Eritrea was a separate culture and they had been taken over by. Anyway, we were driving north. We went through the Rift Valley, which in itself was risky because it was extraordinarily deep. Rift Valley reportedly can accommodate 8 Grand Canyons. I mean, it is huge, and it is so deep that when you get to the bottom of it, the temperature rises because you're getting closer to the core of the earth. That's deep. And driving down into it and then driving up from it is very risky. And I found out why Land Rovers have these windows at the juncture of the side of the vehicle and the roof. You may notice some of them have a curved window that runs along both sides. And I found out what those are for. Coming up, the switchbacks are amazingly tight, and the road is above. When you're coming up, you can look up and see that the wheels, the tires of the vehicle that's coming, that you're going to meet at the next hairpin turn. That's what those windows are for. You can look up and see. That's how pitched this whole thing is. So we made it through that all right, but we got to a stretch of up in Eritrea where we were told a young Italian honeymooning couple had been murdered by the Shiftas, who were the rebels, patriots, Eritrean patriots or rebels, depending on your perspective. They had shot these two and left them on that road. So we're driving, and we see ahead a train of warriors with bandoliers with bullets, crisscross thingy, and rifles. They're riding these small horses, and they're coming right at us, and we kind of gulped, and they did not look friendly. And they split and surrounded us, and we kept driving, and we could see the leader on a walkie-talkie phone. He called somebody somewhere and was advised not to kill us. But that was absolutely on the agenda. It was kill us, not kill us, and there was no joking about it. And they were not friendly. They were quite hostile and threatening. But they were told, obviously, to leave us alone, and they went off down into a valley and left us alone. I don't know whether it was the fact that we had Americanos in the vehicle, whether it was a stack of equipment we had, the shiny aluminum boxes, who we were. The UN was about to hold a world thing in Addis, and from people from all over the world, politicians were going to be there. I don't know what it was, but they let us go, and that was absolutely a moment of serious danger. And it's typical. You live through it, and then about 2 hours later, you realize what you just came through. But another situation, just to go on with that theme of danger, was in Mexico, where I was at least even more threatened, perhaps. I went down there after I left Paradigm Films. I went to Mexico, West Coast, Puerto Vallarta, to do a short film for, I don't know, what the hell was the name of the company? DuPont. They had a new fabric, and they had sent us down with Franco and I with 8 gorgeous models. And we spent about a week there filming these beautiful young women in just clothing on the rocks and so forth. And at the end of it, I stayed. I had nothing to go back to Boston for, except my sweetheart. And after a short time, I sent her a ticket, said, please join me. So she came down. We were there for about a year. And I got into looking at land because Vallarta was just a village at that point. And it was obviously gorgeous. Beach, you name it. And the land was virtually free. And not far from California. Anyway, I started looking at land opportunities, and I made a good friend there. And he said, let's go up to Punta Meta, which is the northern, there's a big bay of the flags, and at the northern tip of that, towards California, there's a former resort. he said, let's go there and take a look at land. Well, we drove in that direction. Beautiful black sand beaches and all the rest of it. Well, I'm making this too long. We stopped at a village, and I rented a Jeep. So Fernando and his brother John, who I'd never met before, was there. And I don't know why John was there, but he was there, and he came along. And we stopped in this village to get a beer, and these little stick cafes, that's all they were really, with a counter outside. And we grabbed a couple of beers and sat at a table outside, and then a whole bunch of Mexican guys joined us. And Fernando said, "You're Italian." And I thought, oh boy, this is not a friendly group. They really have a very strong feeling about gringos, and was deservedly so. But, I spoke a little Italian, but that didn't fool anybody. So we had like 6 or 8 guys sitting on both sides of this picnic table. And then this guy rides in, I got out of a movie, young guy, riding side saddle on a horse, totally dressed in brown leather, shirt, hat, pants. Half of his teeth were gone on one half of his mouth. And he spotted me, and he pushed in and sat next to me, put his arm around me, and he said, "To honor you, you are going to fight the bull this afternoon. We have, it was a holiday of some sort." And he said, we're gonna let you fight the bull," which was Bob dying. And he had this half-toothless smile. And Fernando said, "Bob," he said, "let's go take a piss." And I thought, okay, I guess I have to. We get up, we walk down this tiny little alley between this shack and this shack, or a twig building with counter and food. We walk between, go behind, and there's a little bit of a fenced-in area, which was the outdoor toilet. We go back in there, and he leans back and he kicks the back wall out, just collapses the whole thing. He says, "Follow me." He didn't have to invite me. So we run out in the next alley between where we were and the next building up. We run out, and that's where the Jeep was. And John, who's sitting at the table, stands up facing all these guys who are standing up now. They're going to come and get us. And John reaches in behind the back side of his beautiful Hawaiian shirt, which was hanging out, reaches back in the butt and pulls out a 45. That's why John had joined us that day, because Fernando knew that we were going into a dangerous area. So he pulls out the 45 and chills the guys. And that whole area is known for killing lots of gringos. I mean, it's a very common thing, and the Mexican police wink at it. Anyway, we jump in the Jeep, which had not started all day. It has always been cranky. Turn the key and it starts right up. And John, we're waiting for John to come. He's backing away from the table, coming to us. And, macho, he stops at the counter and very carefully examines 3 oranges and steals them and brings them back to the Jeep, one for each of us. And this is just, and just to irritate the guys who wanted to do me in, or do us in, and also to get some free oranges. But anyway, I was driving, and I think that probably was the only time an actual Jeep did a wheelie. I turned it around and headed back towards town, or Vallarta, the city, which was a few miles away. And Hernando I keep saying Hernando and Fernando. I don't recall which one it was. But anyway, he was a nice guy. He wanted to stop at the next village for lunch, and I said, "I'm not stopping till I get to Boston." Forget it. And we took off and survived the day. But anyway, that area, I didn't buy the land, and it is now just like Miami. It's amazing how that has developed.
Did John kill the guys?
No, there was no shots fired.
Okay, because with the way you said it, it sounded like John killed the guys. So just rephrase that.
How did I?
You just said that John pulled the 45 out.
Yeah, he pulled the. Yeah, he
So
pulled the.
just describe that again without saying, just that little part without saying he killed him. You said he was threatening to kill him. So John,
Yeah,
John had had a gun in his wine shirt.
yeah. When we came out when we came out between the two buildings and jumped into the Jeep, John, who was still at the picnic table with these guys, half dozen guys, they all stood up, and John stood up as well and reached behind in his shirt and pulled out a 45, which indicated why he had joined us that day. He was there as an armed guard, which shows me that they knew that it was a dangerous situation that we were walking into. Anyway, he didn't kill anybody, just showing it was quite enough. And he did the macho thing and stopped at at the counter, which was right between the Jeep and the table, and very carefully stole 3 oranges, and I think to irritate the guys who were standing frothing at the mouth, and to steal the oranges. And he got into the Jeep, and we took off and did the first Jeep wheelie in history, and headed back towards Puerto Vallarta.
So the men didn't try to follow you or charge after you?
I don't know. I didn't look.
In the movies, they always run after you, you know.
Well, I don't know what they did, but I think they realized that they were on foot and we were in a Jeep, and it was no, I doubt it very much if they did anything, but I didn't look back.
Well, that sounds like a great scene. He was kicking out the wall of the basement. That must have been quite a thing.
It was
The bathroom.
it wasn't in the bathroom, not a basement.
Yeah. But I mean, it must have been surprised when he kicked the wall out.
Well, the hair on the back of my head was halfway up. When he did that, it went all the way up, because I realized then that he felt that we were in serious danger, and so yeah, he said, "Follow me," and he couldn't have shaken me if he had a 45. I would have stayed with him. Anyway, that was there, and other situations that were dangerous. I worked on the Yukon as a teenager on a boat up there, and that had its dangerous moments. The river flows at 8 knots when it's not frozen, and that's fast, and it's cocoa brown. So if you fall in the water and you're wearing clothes, you turn instantly into an anchor. And I know that because my cabin mate on the boat, on the tug, Tanana Indian, started to fall over pushing a barge up the Yukon, down the Yukon, and he tripped and he started to go over the side, and I grabbed him by the belt and kept him from going over. And he told me that I had saved his life. I said, "Big deal." He said, "No, big deal. If I'd fallen in the water, you would never have seen me again." He said, "That's the way it is with all that mud." Anyway, so it wasn't me who fell over, but it was a dangerous situation that I didn't realize until that moment. But
tell me about your friend from the Yukon that gave you something, the guy with a funny name, and his wife with the teeth.
Oh, we had a variety of people work on the boat.
Start that again.
Yeah, we had a variety of temporary, short-term workers on that boat. I was there for the season, but we have occasionally a Tanana Indian or two would come aboard, and we had a few cooks from the States who couldn't stand it and work one trip and leave. It was a rough gig. But one of the nicest people was a fellow named Franklin Simon. He was a Tanana Indian in his, I think it was in his 60s. And my mother at that time was working for Franklin Simon stores in Boston, a classy woman's store. But he didn't know anything about the store. But he and his son worked for one trip, and he was a sweetheart of a man. And interesting relationship, father-son. One day, and they both liked me, I liked them. One day, he reaches under his bunk and pulls out a leather case and opens it up, and it has the most beautiful, I think it was an apron, I'm not sure, it was a piece of ware, but it was leather, and it had eagle claws, and it had bear claws, and it was just a brilliant piece. His son had never seen it. His teenage son had never seen this piece, which I was like, they did. I'm sure they didn't live in a 50-room mansion. I mean, they must have been, but he'd never seen it for some reason, and he lived with folks. Anyway, Franklin's told me that he had been the chief of his tribe which is way up in the boonies in Alaska. And I said, used to be. You're not the chief anymore. He said, no, 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 no. Not the. I said, well, how come? And I assumed it was a lifetime, but it wasn't. It was a political position. And I said, how come you're not chief anymore? He said, well, at the last meeting I went to, somebody punched me in the nose, and I resigned. I said, good move. That's direct action, democratic direct action. But I get back to the States, and we swapped addresses, and he sent me, for my mother, a beautiful pair of moccasins, which his wife had made. And he told me that his wife chewed the leather, that's something she was into, chewed the leather, elk or whatever, to make shoes. And he said her teeth were all worn flat. But anyway, it was a beautiful pair with fur and, the beads, colorful beads, which I'm sure were European, but by then they were all imported, of course, throughout the States. Beautiful. And they were tiny, man. My mother could never fit into them. But that's the kind of sweet characters these were. And I had them in the closet for years, and unfortunately, I don't have them any longer because the moths got into it, and I didn't know enough. I didn't know how to preserve. But that's a wonderful experience. I met some very nice people up there, I must say.
So, just give me a quick snapshot of why you're in the Yukon and how you're on a tugboat and what the hell, how'd you go from camera and producer to working on a
No, this is all, I was just well before I had anything to do with,
yeah.
The only camera experience I had an Argus C3, which is by now an antique piece.
By then it was an antique piece.
Back then it was an antique piece, all I could afford. If you have one, you can turn it into a lamp. I mean, it's that old. But anyway, I took pictures, which I found today in the slide tray of my trip to Alaska and on the river. And I didn't think I had them, but I was, knowing that we were going to do this, I started going through some slides. And by golly, there there's shots of the Yukon and all the rest of it. What was I doing up there? Well, I was just graduated from Boston Technical, and I'd been admitted to Tufts, and I needed to make some money. My father was damned if he was going to invest in my education, although he did eventually make up the difference. But anyway, so I saw this thing where there was a bunch of guys driving up to Alaska from Worcester? No, from some Concord, Mass. There was a school teacher, a high school teacher. Every year he'd put together a truck and bunks, and you go to board for $125, and you could ride with them over 8 days from Concord, Mass, up to Fairbanks, Alaska, and get a job. Well, at that time, the word was that they were starving for workers up in Fairbanks. So I went in the gold fields. U.S. Smelting, Melting, and Refining was the company that was mining up there. And anyway, they were located in Boston. So I went to their office in Boston, and they said, yes, we need employees, but we can't promise you a job. You have to go there and then come to our office there, and we'll hire you, but we can't commit to you. So anyway, 8 days later, we're up in Alaska. I go to U.S. Smelting, Melting, and Refining, and they said no. There were, in the town of 18,000, which was Fairbanks, in 1952, there were 50,000 unemployed. 50,000 unemployed. And I'm there with $50, expecting a job, no job. So I had to wait 2 weeks, and slept in the back of a big truck out at Ladd Air Force Base. I had 2 meals a day. I had in the morning, I went to the Army base there, the air base. In the morning, I had a monkey dish, this little dish full of potato salad. And in the evening, I had a monkey dish of chili, 30 cents a piece. And in the middle, I couldn't stand it. I'd get a loaf of bread, and I did this for a couple of weeks and heard that they were hiring on the river, which the boats on the river were, I think still are, owned by Department of the Interior, the railroad. And there was a railroad office in Fairbanks, so I rushed down there, and they said, yes, but you're too young. You have to, I think it was 18 or 16, I don't know what the hell I was. It was too young for them. They said you need to have a parental or an adult permission. So I said, I'll be right back, not knowing how I was going to get that from Boston. So there was a church, Catholic church. I walked in. I said, may I speak to the priest? And it was this really neat young priest. And I said, this is the situation. I'm starving. I need a job. There it is. But I need an adult. And he signed a letter. And I went right back. And the next day I was on a train from Fairbanks down to Nenana, which is a river town that's right. It's on the Yukon, meets the Nenana River and meets the Yukon, and that's where the railroad comes through. The only contact the railroad has with the river system. And so I get out and look in this town, and it's like, golly, there were a lot of Alaskan cities. They have a strip of road that ends in a forest, starts in a forest. That's it. And there was one gas station. There were 2 ammo shops, and there were 7 bars. And anyway, I went aboard, and I was taken aboard. They were expecting me, and I had spent the summer working on this tug that pushed barges up and down from the Nenana down to the Yukon, and then up the White Horse and down towards the Bering Sea, and it was an adventure. But that's a whole other reel. That's a whole other episode. And I managed to come out of there with no money. They were paying us $125 every single week, plus room and board. And then when you hit town, and they made me drink. I swear, they made me do it. Anyway, that was a whole other story.
Did you sort of become of age there? Did you feel like you sort of became a man at any point with that kind of life? I mean, that's a pretty rugged.
Did I become a man there? I grew a beard. That's where this beard started, 1952. It's only come off twice. Once when I went in the service, and once when I applied for the Merv Griffin job, and they said, grow your beard back, we don't care. Otherwise, I had the beard. But that didn't make me a man. That made me a boy with a beard. And, have I ever become a man? I don't know. It took a while, That one trip taught me a few things. It taught me how to fit in with a bunch of working guys, because I was an innocent and had never been inside a bar and was kind of a sissy, I think, up until that point. And I stopped being a sissy, but I don't think I, quote, became a man. But it was an interesting trip. I made some wonderful friends there. And it was a very difficult summer. Drinking was, I would drink, I wouldn't even get a buzz. I'd drink and I'd be sick. I'd just skip over the whole happy part of that. But I used to go because that's what the guys did. And I remember there was a fellow named Swede Jensen, big, handsome guy. He was from one of the northern states, this Swede. Pretty good-looking, robust, mellow dude. And we became friends, and we went to a bar one night, and we're sitting beside each other, facing the bar, and we hear this brouhaha starting down at the end of the bar, and we look up, turn around, and there's these 2 guys fighting, and they're fighting their way out past us towards the door. Well, as luck would have it, one of the guys swung his elbow back and caught Swede right across. And he looked at me, and he's got 2 front teeth in his hand. I said, oh, Jesus. Anyway, he said, it's just bad luck. He was very mellow. But he left the next day to go back to wherever he was, Michigan or someplace, with his teeth to have them replanted. But that was Nenana. It was, I recall being so drunk, so hungover one morning that we had a steel barge attached to the tug, and it was time to load on these barrels of jet fuel because we were bringing jet fuel to one of these hidden bases up in the Yukon, air bases, military air bases. And the trick was they had this crane, and they hooked these little metal thingies, steel things, onto 3 barrels, and they swung these 3 55-gallon drum barrels over us. They let it down. You undid these clips, and then you roll these rather heavy barrels into place. Well, I was so hungover that I couldn't see, and they're lowering these things. And I thought, man, they're going to turn me into a pancake. But the engineer on the boat took pity. He could see the condition I was in, and he said he said, sit down for a minute, and he had a tank of oxygen, and he fed me oxygen, 100% oxygen from his welding tank into my nose, so that I was semi-conscious. I mean, oh wow, yeah. I guess that is a dangerous moment. Anyway, what else?
Well, tell me about, what do you think about luck? Do you believe in luck, and do you think you've had good luck, bad luck? What do you think about luck?
What do I think about luck? Man, you come up with some questions.
Just think about that for a second. Hold on.
Here's Bob thinking about it.
I mean, do you think, does luck have anything to do with it? Anything? And is there, do you feel like you've been lucky, unlucky, and do you believe in it?
Well, believing in luck assumes, I guess that would assume there is some kind of a plan or a script that falls to one person that doesn't fall to another person. I don't believe that at all. Luck, happenstance, which, it could go either way. I think one's personality, energy, vibe, whatever you call, affects what is so-called luck. I mean, I don't know. I don't believe in luck. I think, as Plato said, shit happens. Or that was Socrates. I don't know. I get those tied. It can go either way sometimes, and it sometimes went well for me, and sometimes it went poorly. I'm relating in these interviews. I'm relating to basically the good stuff that happened. I obviously wasn't killed. I have physical problems because of bone injuries that I don't talk about, but that's bad luck. I don't know. I guess it's an attitude. Someone said you make your luck. I don't know. I don't believe in luck as any kind of a preordained kind of drift. I don't believe in that at all. I think you make your own luck, or you seize opportunities. You see opportunities that others might not see, and some would call that luck, but somebody else might walk right by that situation and not recognize it and have, quote, bad luck. So no, I don't. I guess the answer is no, I don't believe in luck. I must say that things have broken my way many times, and I'm grateful. And I don't take full responsibility or credit for that, but nor do I take responsibility for the things that happened badly. I mean, I've been divorced twice. Those were not good situations. They were not happy situations, for example.
If you're grateful, it implies that you're grateful to somebody or something.
No. I'm grateful. I'm happy. Let's put it that way. I'm happy. Yeah, that's a better word. I'm happy that so many things happened to me that I'm happy. I guess grateful is not the right word, because there is implied a recipient of that, and I certainly don't take full credit for all the good stuff, nor full blame for the bad stuff.
It seems like you've cheated death a number of times.
Yes, so far. So far.
So far, you don't hear my question. Can you restate my statement?
That you said, I believe that I have.
So just make it a statement, if you would. So far,
I wouldn't. Well, no, I wouldn't say I've cheated death. That's not the way I would say things. So that's not legitimate.
All right. So, but you've escaped.
I've escaped some pretty close calls, I must say, and that's a good thing. Those close calls happened because I stuck my butt out in the wind when perhaps I shouldn't have. But when I was young, when I was in my early teens, I decided that I wasn't going to have two lives, that I was going to have one life, and I thought I might just go for it and live as much as I could in those years that were allotted to me. And I was about 14, and I guess at that point, an interesting time. It was I had been taking a series of lessons at the Congregational Church preparatory to my becoming a member of the church. And the night that I was to be admitted, I went into this in front of this panel of elders, and they said, "Robert, are you ready to become a member of our church?" And I heard my mouth say no. After weeks of studying stuff, and if it's pro forma, you go in there and they offer it to you if you've been behaved yourself, and they offer you membership, and there you are. And I said no. And I heard it. They heard it when I heard it, and they said, "This has never happened." They didn't say that, but they were obviously uncomfortable. And I broke the silence. I said, "Thank you." I got up and walked out, and that was it for me in the church. I realized that it just really made no sense to me at all, and it would have been dishonest of me to become a member of that very fine church. Nice people. But at that time, that's when I said, no, I'm just going to live my life as honorably as I can, with as much adventure experience as I can, and do it intelligently. And I mean, at that point, I had been reading a lot and continued to read a lot, and just was intellectually curious, which was wonderful. I'm very blessed. Whatever the heck made me do that. I was 15. I was a member. I had on the mailing list of the Metropolitan Opera when they came to Boston. I got the early ticket. I mean, at 15, that was kind of unusual, particularly in my family and my circle. I have no idea why I was so into it. But at 15, I was also going down to the black jazz clubs downtown and listening to some wonderful jazz. Drinking at 15, just kind of fake drinking. But, so yeah, I was just intellectually very curious and continue to be. As you can see, I've got books. I'm going to read one of them someday, but I have a lot of them there all over the place. I continue. I'm still a student at my age, and I'm so happy of the World Wide Web. I walk around with a tablet with the world's largest library of information. And it's a miracle that thing exists, and it's just, it's information. It's not wisdom. It's information. It's data. It also spews stupidity, so everyone has to be selective. But it's amazing. I would used to have to get in a streetcar, go down to the public library in Boston to look up something. I just open it up and hit a few buttons, and there it is. And if I don't like that version of it, I'll go somewhere else in there. I mean, it's a miracle. It's a miracle. And I'm so glad I've survived long enough to enjoy it.
Do you think you could be an old soul before your time, at the age of 15, 14? Do you feel like you might be, would that explain anything to you?
Was I an old soul at 14 to 15? Well, part of me was very mature, I think. That's fair to say. Old soul. Part of me was quite mature, I would say, and part of me wasn't. I was still just a young jerk. I didn't know lots of things, most everything, and I was mystified by a lot of it. But I think the feature that I had then was curiosity. Curiosity and maybe fatalism. I don't know, some mixture in there that led me to be a student, and I'm still a student. I'm always studying, I'm always reading, I'm always probing. I tell my friends that I'm not going to die until I know everything, and it's going to be a while. I think that's what's kept me going for 85 years. 85 years.
When's your birthday?
When's my birthday? You're going to send me a card, right?
Something.
January 24th. Yep.
What year? How's your math?
It'll be, what year? It's going to
When
be.
were you born?
I thought you were, what year I was going to have the next birthday. And I was born in 1933, the end of the Depression. I think that was the year that, was FDR elected, 33? I don't know. A lot has happened. I was alive for the beginning of World War II, the end of the Depression. Yep.
My dad was 3 years younger than you, 3 years shy of you.
How old are you, Reg?
I'm 54.
54. I got underwear older than you. Borscht circuit line.
It probably matches my teeth color.
Oy.
What do we call it for today?
Here's me calling it a day. A day.
A day.
Viola.